I'm not asking for your money." His voice was low but unwavering, echoing through the opulent private dining room. "I just want to help you walk again." The words hung in the air like smoke curling beneath the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. Taboo, absurd, impossible. Isabella Grant blinked once, slowly. Her manicured fingers froze around the crystal glass just before her lips touched the Bordeaux wine. Candlelight flickered across the private room of Le Bernardin, catching on her diamond earrings and flashing a cold glint across her steel-gray eyes. Across from her, just beyond the velvet rope separating VIP guests from staff, stood a man in a janitor's uniform, a mop worn with use, still in his hand. His face, however, showed no servility, no plea, only sincerity. Isabella tilted her head, lips curling into a half-smile. "What did you just say?" The man leaned the mop against the wall and took one step forward. "I said, I want to help you walk again." The soft music drifting from the main dining hall outside faded. Even the dull hum of traffic on 51st Street seemed to vanish. All that remained was the taut current between two people, a billionaire woman seated in a custom wheelchair and a janitor with unwavering brown eyes. Isabella laughed, not politely, not sweetly, but short, sharp, dripping with scorn, the kind of laugh only a woman with more power than mercy could muster. "You're a janitor," she said, her words clipped and precise. "Do you plan to fix spines with floor wax and bleach?" Daniel Hayes did not flinch. "No," he replied calmly. "I bring something your doctors never have." Her brow arched. "And what's that? A miracle with a mop?" The corner of his mouth twitched, but his eyes held steady. Perspective. Her gray eyes narrowed. "You have 5 seconds to leave this room before I call security. I don't care how many floors you've mopped." Daniel's reply was quiet, steady. "I've only mopped yours. 3 nights a week, for the last 8 months." The air stilled. Isabella faltered, just for a second. Daniel did not look away. His gaze wasn't invasive, wasn't deferential, just calm, relentless truth. "And in those 8 months," he continued, "I've seen more of you than your mirrors would ever dare to show." Isabella's hand hovered above the small button at the table's edge, the one that summoned her private maitre d'. "You have 3 seconds left," she snapped. Daniel's voice cut through, low but sharp enough to stop her finger cold. "You pretend you can't feel your legs, but they move when you're angry. Subtle. Fast. You don't notice, but they move. Like just now. When I mentioned walking again, your left foot twitched. Reflexive. Real." Her finger froze above the button. Silence filled the room. "You think I'm here to blackmail you?" Daniel asked quietly. "No," she bit out. "You're here to insult me. In my own domain." "That's not it," he said. "I once watched someone I loved claw their way back from a place darker than this. And I know. There's a way out." A flicker passed over Isabella's face, so brief most would miss it. But Daniel saw. It wasn't fear of him, nor fear of danger. It was something far more terrifying. Hope. "I don't want your hope," she whispered, her voice tight. "I know," he answered gently, "but it's still yours, whether you want it or not." Isabella turned her gaze to the rain-streaked glass of New York outside. The city pulsed on, chaotic, cold, indifferent. Yet in this room, time seemed to halt. She set her wineglass down, the crystal clinking faintly against wood. "What's your name?" "Daniel Hayes." She nodded once. "And what do you expect in return for this unsolicited generosity?" "Nothing." She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "Nothing in this world is free." "With me, it is," Daniel replied. I've already paid the price." Before she could ask, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small card. Just his name and number, clean and plain. He placed it beside her untouched dessert plate. "I'll be here until the end of the month. After that, I don't know. But if one day you decide to stop pretending, call me." He turned to leave. "You know I could have you fired tomorrow," Isabella called, her voice sharp, cold. Daniel paused, but didn't look back. "I know." "Then why risk it?" He hesitated, then spoke. "Because once, someone risked it for me, and it saved my life." He stepped past the velvet curtain, brushed by the maitre d' who didn't dare speak, and disappeared down the hushed hallway. Isabella remained frozen for a long time. She didn't touch the card, but later that night, when her driver wheeled her into her penthouse, her fingers tightened inside her coat pocket, around something she didn't remember placing there. The windows of the small Brooklyn apartment rattled as the late autumn wind swept past. Thin streaks of rain traced long lines down the old glass, carrying with them the scent of damp asphalt, chimney smoke from the neighboring houses, and, just faintly, the sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a street cart below. Daniel Hayes leaned against the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain mug. Steam from the tea blurred his already bloodshot eyes after a long day. The yellow light pooled across the cracked linoleum floor, where his cheap paint job only partly covered the scars. Not elegant, not perfect, but it was the only home he and his daughter had. At the small table by the window sat a 7-year-old girl, legs in gray wool socks swinging above the floor. Emily Hayes, wide, bright eyes, curls tumbling around her round face. She bent over her drawing, the crayon trembling with the rhythm of her heartbeat. "You're late," Emily said, her gaze still fixed on the paper. Her voice was soft, but firm enough to strike his chest. Daniel took a sip of tea, letting the heat steady him against the chaos still flooding his mind after that impossible conversation at Le Bernardin. Got caught, talking to someone. Emily's crayon stopped mid-stroke. She looked up, her young eyes carrying a weight far older than her years. Was it that woman again? Daniel said nothing. He had taught himself to be honest, but sometimes Emily's clarity left him speechless. He didn't want to drag her into another person's sorrow, into the secrets the world whispered behind Isabella Grant's name. "I saw her last week," Emily said, setting the crayon down. Her small fingers turned the battered doll beside her. "She's sad, the kind of sad that looks like she forgot how to smile." Daniel let out a brittle laugh and sat down at the table beside her. "Some people carry heavy things you can't see, Emily." "Like Mom?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. The mug froze halfway to his lips. The tea's warmth no longer reached his calloused hands. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah, like Mom." His gaze drifted far away, pulled back 4 years in an instant. The hospital came flooding back. He had stood at her bedside, watching the woman he loved. Kara, battlefield nurse, fierce, fearless, brilliantly alive, fade into a shadow. After the miscarriage, everything had changed. One morning she woke and said, "I can't feel my legs." The VA doctors ran everything, CTs, MRIs, nothing. One finally admitted conversion disorder. Psychological paralysis. We can't fix what we can't see. But Daniel had refused to give up. He read every scrap of research, sat with her through the tremors, held her when she wept in silence. Inch by inch, day by day, Kara came back. Until one morning she walked again, straight into the volunteer corps of Doctors Without Borders. And 6 months later, in Haiti, she was gone. An accident, sudden and brutal, like life itself. All that remained, besides Emily, was a fire. Not loud, not raging, but steady. The conviction that wounds that don't bleed can still destroy. And sometimes, only those who have been broken know how to help rebuild. Daniel blinked, returning to the present. Emily still sat there, feet swinging, doll in her lap. Lucy, stitched ear, patched belly, a survivor in fabric. "Is she sad too?" Daniel asked softly, touching the doll. Emily shook her head. "Number I fixed her. She knows being broken a little is okay." A rare, gentle smile tugged at his lips. He kissed the top of her messy curls. Outside, New York's rain fell harder, horns blaring, streetcars skimming over wet pavement. Inside the small Brooklyn apartment, a man cooled his tea, held his daughter close, and in his chest echoed the words he had spoken hours earlier to Isabella Grant. "I just want to help you walk again." That night, a black Bentley glided through the rain-soaked streets of the Upper East Side, neon lights rippling across the wet pavement. The city pulsed, alive and relentless. But inside the car, everything was silence. Isabella Grant sat motionless. Her driver kept his eyes fixed ahead, hands tight on the wheel, not daring to glance at her through the rearview mirror. She had not spoken a single word since leaving Le Bernardin. The car stopped before a towering glass high-rise, her penthouse designed to perfection, without a single flaw. When the driver came to assist her, Isabella only gave a faint nod, then let the wheels of her custom chair glide across the polished marble floor, straight inside. The apartment was vast, immaculate, and nearly soulless. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights, but they did nothing to warm the cold emptiness within. Everything was curated. The long ebony dining table, the bar lined with perfectly ordered bottles, the glossy Italian leather sofa. No clutter, no life. Isabella rolled down the long corridor. Passing the mirror, she stopped instinctively. Reflected back was a 38-year-old woman. Dark brown hair softly waved, a flawless face of makeup, a body poised in a custom luxury wheelchair. Perfect, except for the legs. Her lips trembled as she muttered, "Reflexes. Who does he think he is?" The steel-gray eyes blurred suddenly. She tried to sneer at her own reflection, but her hand shook as it pressed against her thigh. No sensation, no movement. Yet, deep inside, the memory of that involuntary twitch at Le Bernardin haunted her. Isabella inhaled sharply, spun her chair, and rolled straight into her office. That room was her last fortress, the place where she still held control, even as whispers outside murmured, "Grant is only a shadow on the leather chair." The desk, polished black walnut, was stacked with financial reports and international contracts, and among them, a photo frame. Isabella froze. In it, Harrison, her ex-husband. Tall, charismatic smile, the glint in his eyes of a man born to conquer. A man once admired across Wall Street. A man who, on the night of the accident 5 years ago, when she tumbled down the stairs of his restaurant, had not driven her to the hospital. He had simply picked up the phone, called a car service, and returned to his dinner with 2 bored lawyers. 3 days later, he moved out. 2 weeks after that, divorce papers landed on her desk. The scans back then had shown no spinal damage. Doctors had told her plainly, "You can walk." But she hadn't. Not because her body forbade it, but because something inside her had shut down. Since then, Isabella Grant, the CEO once famed for her icy resolve, had remained in her chair. No one dared mention it. No one dared ask. They all simply looked at her as though she were a sculpture, beautiful, immobile, untouchable. 2 days later. In the kitchen of Le Bernardin, Daniel Hayes began his shift again. He pushed his mop bucket along the marble hallway. One earbud dangled, but no music played. He preferred the rhythm of the place, the clatter of knives on cutting boards, spoons against pans, the urgent murmurs in a three-star Michelin kitchen. It reminded him of field hospitals years ago, where Kara had once worked as a nurse. Controlled chaos, elegance on the surface, turmoil behind the curtain. He understood, because Isabella Grant's life was the same. Near 9 p.m., the maître d' pulled him aside. "There's a special request," he said quietly, tense. "From who?" "The woman in the VIP room, Ms. Grant. And she said if it isn't you, she'll leave." Daniel froze. "Are you sure?" The maître d' swallowed hard, eyes uneasy. "I'm sure." She was very clear. Daniel pulled off his gloves, hung his apron aside, and made his way toward the familiar room. Inside, Isabella Grant sat waiting at the table. Flawless posture, elegance intact. Yet in her gray eyes, something had shifted. No longer absolute cold, softer, more dangerous. "You asked for me," Daniel said, keeping a respectful distance. "I have a few questions," Isabella answered, eyes locked on him. "Go ahead." She studied him, not like an executive assessing a resume, but like a scientist weighing a volatile chemical. "Did she ever forgive you, Daniel?" He blinked. "Who?" "The one you couldn't save." The words cut deep, but Daniel didn't flinch. "She didn't need to forgive me, because in the end, she saved herself. I just held the light long enough for her to find the door." Isabella turned away, jaw tight. Her voice was barely a breath. "What if I try and fail? Then we try again. And if I fall, I'll be there. And if I hate you for what you make me confront?" Daniel's smile was small, warm, honest. "Then I'll still be there." A long silence stretched. And then, for the first time in 5 years, Isabella Grant whispered the two most terrifying words of her life. "Okay, let's begin." Morning sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, flooding the penthouse living room. Isabella Grant sat upright in her wheelchair, arms crossed firmly over her chest, her gaze as sharp as if she were about to enter a billion-dollar negotiation. In front of her, Daniel Hayes knelt, unrolling a simple gray yoga mat across the walnut floor. He didn't look at her as a patient, nor as a powerful CEO. He looked at her as a person, something that made Isabella feel both uncomfortable and unsettled. "You've got more rules than a board of directors," Daniel said, half joking. "I don't like surprises," Isabella replied flatly, her tone like a blade. "All right, then. What are the rules?" "Rule 1. You don't touch me unless I give permission." Daniel nodded. "Fair." "Rule 2. No pity. I can't stand pity." He smirked faintly. "Pity doesn't exist in my vocabulary." "Rule 3. If I say stop, you stop immediately." He held her gaze without blinking. "I promise." The air paused for a beat before he opened his worn canvas bag. Inside were resistance bands, a hand mirror, a rolled towel, and a leather-bound journal, frayed at the corners, its pages yellowed with age. Isabella frowned. "What's that?" He brushed his fingers along the spine, his eyes distant for a moment. "My wife's journal, Kara. She wrote down every day, every doubt, every centimeter she clawed back from the dark. I thought, it might remind you you're not alone." Isabella stared at the book as though it were dangerous. "She made it through?" Daniel nodded softly. "She stood up again and walked straight into a field clinic, because that's who she was." Silence pressed down. Isabella lifted her eyes, just slightly trembling. "And then she died in Haiti." For the first time since they had met, Isabella said nothing. The icy armor she wore was replaced by a wordless quiet. The session began. Daniel sat across from her, voice calm and steady. "Close your eyes. Just breathe." Isabella frowned. "I didn't invite you here to teach meditation. Number. But your body has forgotten what safety feels like. Breathing reminds it." She was about to fire back a sarcastic retort, but the serenity in his eyes stopped her. Isabella inhaled, chest rising and falling. Air filled her lungs, not enough to heal, but enough to stir something long dormant. Daniel watched closely. The faint quiver of her upper lip, the twitch in her right thumb, and, most telling of all, the subtle flecks of her toes inside the sleek leather shoes when sunlight skimmed her knees. Tiny cracks were appearing in the fortress she had built. That afternoon, after Daniel left, Isabella remained alone in the room. The penthouse suddenly felt different. Not lighter, not warmer, but no longer sterile. She wheeled to the bookshelf. A long row of hardcovers glared back. Finance reports, economic theory, business strategy. A lifetime built on numbers and power. Her gaze dropped to the lowest shelf, a dusty wooden case. Inside, an old violin she had once played in college. She lifted the lid, then slammed it shut, hands trembling. Too much. Too soon. She turned instead to the bar, poured half a glass of bourbon. But instead of drinking, she pushed it away. A whisper slipped from her lips, so quiet it was as if she barely believed it herself. "I'm changing. God, I'm changing." The next day, Daniel entered and noticed the difference immediately. Isabella wasn't wearing her tailored blazer, nor her heels. She sat on the yoga mat in a plain white t-shirt and dark leggings. Still Isabella Grant, but with less armor. "No steel armor today?" he teased lightly. She shot him a glance. "You think I came here to be mocked?" Number I came here to see a little more of the real you. They began with simple movements, pulling bands, working with the mirror. "What's the mirror for?" Isabella muttered. "So you can see yourself healing." "I hate mirrors." "Then maybe that's where we start." For a while they sat in silence. Then Isabella broke it. "Do you want to know what really happened?" Daniel looked up, surprised. "Only if you want to tell me." She fixed her eyes on the mirror, hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. Her voice was hoarse. "I didn't fall. I jumped. The air froze. I didn't want to die," she whispered. "I just wanted him to stop looking at me like I was furniture in his own restaurant." "Harrison?" Daniel asked quietly. She nodded sharply. "He loved the company, loved the spotlight. And me? I was just the backdrop. Beautiful, profitable, replaceable. After the jump, he didn't even come to the hospital. Just sent flowers. And a lawyer." Daniel's hands rested loosely on his knees. His voice was low but steady. "That's not your shame to carry. Don't wear it like a life sentence." She gave a bitter laugh. "Try telling that to the voice in my head for the last 5 years. Daniel leaned in slightly, gaze firm yet tender. "You didn't lose your legs. You surrendered them. But that means you can take them back." Her gray eyes widened, flashing with both rage and terror. For the first time in years, Isabella Grant didn't know whether to sneer or to cry. That night, after Daniel had gone, Isabella sat before the grand piano draped in dust. Her trembling fingers touched the keys. One note, then another. Sound rippled through the vast, cold apartment, carrying her back to 19. Barefoot, laughing, playing in a college dorm room while her roommate sang off-key beside her. No wheelchair, no CEO mask. Only a woman, not whole, not finished, but not yet defeated. Weeks passed. Every morning, the grand living room of the Upper East Side penthouse was no longer just a stage for lavish guests. On the gray yoga mat, each breath, Each faint flex of a toe, each tiny movement became a battle. Isabella Grant, in a white t-shirt and fitted leggings, sat on the mat, sweat glistening across her face, but her eyes still sharp as steel. Beside her, Daniel Hayes knelt, not with his familiar mop in hand, but with Kara's worn journal resting on his knee. Each day, Isabella pushed a little further. One morning, a toe stiffened. Another time, her thigh quivered under strain. And then, one morning, Daniel said quietly, "Your body is ready. Try to stand." The air froze. Isabella's gray eyes flashed with panic. "Are you insane?" "Number, it's just time." She drew a deep breath, hands gripping the armrests, shoulders tightening. Her legs, dormant for years, trembled like leaves in the wind. Veins stood out along her temples. Daniel didn't touch her. He simply stood close. Slow. This isn't about proving anything. Just trying. Isabella bit her lip. Forgotten muscles stirred awake. Her legs shook, but she forced herself up. For one fleeting moment, she stood, upright. Her eyes widened, her breath ragged, heart pounding with a single chaotic scream inside her head. "I'm standing. God, I'm standing." But seconds later, it all collapsed. Her legs betrayed her. Her body crashed to the hardwood floor. A heavy thud echoed. Her knees scraped, blood seeping out, her palms skinned raw. Isabella screamed, not from the physical pain, but from the humiliation tearing her apart. That night, the penthouse was so silent she could hear the second hand ticking across the clock. Isabella sat slumped on the floor, an overturned bottle of liquor by the sofa. A crystal glass shattered in pieces. She had smashed the small mirror Daniel left behind, shards scattered across the floor, her distorted reflection splintered in 100 fragments. Her gray eyes brimmed but stayed dry, burning. She screamed into the broken glass, "I'm a joke, a woman not worthy of life." The vast room echoed with her ragged breaths. Isabella curled in on herself, as if to vanish into the shadows. The door swung open. Daniel stood at the threshold, saying nothing. He saw the blood seeping from her knees, the trembling hands, the shattered glass across the floor. He didn't rush to heal, didn't lunge to lift her up. He simply sat down, a few feet away, silent. Isabella raised her face, voice hoarse, dripping with fury. "Is this what you wanted? To see me broken? Are you satisfied now?" Daniel shook his head, his voice soft as wind. "No. I just want you to know, when you're ready, I'll still be here." It wasn't a promise of miracles, nor a guarantee that the fall wouldn't happen again, but it was a thread, thin, fragile, that kept Isabella from plunging completely into the abyss. That night, she fell asleep on the mat, dried blood on her knees, her tears soaking into her shirt. And for the first time in years, Isabella Grant no longer felt like an untouchable statue. She was simply a broken woman, with someone waiting for her to rise again. The morning after the fall, sunlight poured through the penthouse's massive glass walls. No more soft golden lamps, no suffocating silence, just harsh white light exposing everything. Dried bloodstains on the hardwood, shattered glass on the floor, and a woman sitting motionless, her knees crudely bandaged with strips of cloth. Isabella Grant braced her hands against the chair, staring at her trembling body. The humiliation of the night before still burned inside her. Yet strangely, instead of calling a doctor or locking herself away, she picked up her phone. The message was only 3 words. 9 a.m. Come. Daniel Hayes arrived, carrying his familiar worn bag. He saw the blood, the broken shards, the pale face of Isabella, but also the brightness in her eyes, no longer sealed shut. You still want to continue? He asked. Not want, Isabella rasped, her voice hoarse but firm. Need. Daniel nodded. No hollow comfort, no false promises. He laid out the mat again, set down the resistance bands. That session was no longer a game of power. No rigid rules. Isabella allowed him to adjust her arm's position, to hold the mirror close, forcing her to look at herself. Try curling your toes. They're not moving. But they're tensing. That's real. Sweat dripped down Isabella's brow. Her teeth clenched. Her whole body stiffened just to make a movement that, for others, would be nothing. Do it again. Daniel. Her voice cracked. This is pointless. Number pointless is quitting before the second try. She looked at him. His brown eyes never wavered. And for the first time, Isabella Grant, the woman who once commanded thousands with a single glance, let this man's gaze lift her. Her toes curled again. Tiny. Barely. But real. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears welling, unclear whether from pain or from the fragile spark of hope that had just broken through. My God, I can still feel. Daniel smiled, small but warm. See? That isn't a miracle. That's you. In the days that followed, the penthouse no longer felt so cold. Training sessions became the rhythm of her life. Some days, Isabella only rolled her chair to the mat, stared, then left. Some days, she broke down mid-session, pounding the floor with her fists. But Daniel never left. He sat quietly, patient. Then, one rainy afternoon, Isabella turned away from the mat and wheeled herself to the dust-covered grand piano. She sat in silence, staring at the black and white keys muted for years. Her trembling fingers touched one, and a note rang out. The sound was lonely, imperfect, but alive, threading through the apartment. Daniel watched from afar. He didn't intrude. He knew some wounds could only be reopened by her own hand. That weekend, Central Park was veiled in mist, golden leaves carpeting the paths. Isabella, in a thick coat and gloves, sat beneath an elm in her wheelchair. For once, she wasn't there for a charity gala or a press conference. Laughter carried through the fog. Daniel was jogging with Emily. His daughter's small hand clutched his, the other dragging the battered doll, Lucy. Isabella recognized that laugh instantly. Warm, free. It made her chest tighten. Emily ran straight to her, stopping before the chair, eyes wide with curiosity. I know you. You had dinner with my dad at the fancy place. Isabella laughed. A genuine laugh, rare and unguarded. Dinner? Your dad cleared tables while I just sat there. You call that dinner? Emily nodded firmly. It was dinner for me. Daniel caught up, breath still heavy. She usually doesn't talk to strangers, he whispered. Lucy told me to, Emily said, holding up the scarred doll. She said you look like someone who needs a friend. Isabella looked at the doll. Torn ear stitched, patched belly. A pink ribbon tied where hair had fallen away. Ugly, and yet strangely familiar. What happened to her? Isabella asked softly. Emily shrugged. She's been through things, but I don't throw her away. Because she knows my secrets. Isabella's heart clenched. She reached out, touching Lucy with her gloved hand. You fixed her? Yes. I didn't want her to feel left out just because she's broken. Broken things are still valuable. Broken people are still people. The simple words cut deeper than any scalpel. Isabella swallowed hard. Who told you that? Emily shrugged again. My mom used to say it. Daniel stiffened, breath faltering. He had never told Emily much about Kara, but somehow she remembered. And now, those faint memories were touching Isabella too. Isabella handed Lucy back, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you. I haven't felt like a person in years." Emily tilted her head. "Then, do you want Lucy to stay with you for a while? You look kind of lonely inside." The words hit Isabella like a crack in the armor she'd built for 5 years. She didn't answer, just nodded. Emily placed Lucy gently in her lap before running off to feed the ducks. Daniel sat down on the bench beside her, silent. "She's extraordinary," Isabella murmured. "My daughter," Daniel nodded. "She takes after her mom." A pause. Isabella glanced at the doll in her lap. "Daniel, I'm tired of being seen as a statue. Beautiful, untouchable, but not human." He turned, his gaze soft yet steady. "You're not a statue. You're a woman learning how to begin again." Her gray eyes shimmered. Isabella said nothing, but for the first time she allowed herself to believe those words. That evening, back at the penthouse, Isabella set Lucy on the bedroom windowsill. It looked absurd, a CEO with a battered doll. But in that moment, as she drew the curtains and switched off the lights, the tiny figure made the room feel less empty. And in the darkness, Isabella whispered words she had never dared to say aloud. Maybe being broken isn't the end. One early morning, the penthouse living room was already awash with sunlight. Isabella was seated on the mat before Daniel even arrived, hair tied up, her face flushed with focus. Daniel set his bag down, raising an eyebrow with a faint smile. "Looks like someone doesn't need a manager pushing her anymore." "Don't get smug," Isabella retorted, though the corner of her mouth curved slightly. The session began. Daniel placed a small towel beneath her foot. "Pull it in, slowly." Isabella inhaled sharply, shoulders tense. Her right foot curled. The towel shifted, just barely, so small, but enough to make both of them freeze. "Again," Daniel said softly. She bit her lip, repeated. The towel inched forward, again and again, until her breathing stuttered, sweat soaking through her shirt. "My God," she whispered. "It moved. I—" "Not it," Daniel cut in, his eyes alight. "You." Isabella broke down in tears, but for once they weren't bitter. They were the tears of someone who had waited too long for herself. "I never thought this body still remembered me." "Because today," Daniel murmured, "you gave it permission to remember." That night, Isabella didn't drink. Instead, she opened a drawer and took out an old photo. She and her father standing in front of their Vermont cabin, his smile wide, his arm wrapped around a young girl in paint-splattered overalls. Isabella whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" She folded the photo, tucking it into Kara's journal that Daniel had left behind. But when the first flicker of hope appeared, the shadows rushed back in. Another morning, Isabella opened her phone. On the screen, a message from an unknown number. "You think that makes you a hero? You're still just a fraud, Isabella. People like you don't deserve a second chance." Her chest clenched. Her hands went cold. That same day, the tabloids splashed a photo. Isabella slipping from her chair onto the mat during training with Daniel. The headline blared beneath it. "Wall Street Queen, disabled or deceiving?" In an instant, all her progress twisted into humiliation. Isabella skipped the next session. She didn't reply to Daniel's texts. The penthouse sank back into darkness, as it had for 5 years. She lay curled on the sofa, phone face down on the table, buzzing with unread messages. In her mind, the cruel words echoed. Fraud. Undeserving. When Daniel came, the bell rang unanswered. He waited, stood in the lobby, looking up at the towering windows that never opened. By the third day, he was still there, standing silently, not knocking, only waiting. At last, on a gray morning, the door cracked open. Isabella stood there, not in her chair, on trembling legs, awkward, leaning against the frame, but standing. "You." Daniel's voice caught. Isabella averted her gaze, whispering, "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I'm afraid that everything I've tried will mean nothing, that I'll still be just a luxury joke in a $15,000 chair." Daniel stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "You're afraid of the wrong thing, not of being not enough. You should be afraid of never trying again." Isabella turned away, tears streaming. "They don't know me. They only see the worst version of me." "Then show them something else," Daniel said firmly. Her voice trembled as she confessed the most terrifying truth. "But what if the cruelest voice is the one inside my own head?" Daniel was silent for a beat. Then he sat down, his voice low but unwavering. "Then we'll teach that voice how to speak again." That day, they didn't do physical therapy. They sat across from each other on the cold penthouse floor. Daniel opened Kara's journal, pointing to a page worn at the edges. She wrote, "Today I felt a small twitch. It didn't belong to the doctors. It didn't belong to the chart. It belonged to me. And it told me, I'm still here." Isabella closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek. "I'm so tired of being a symbol," she whispered. "Then don't. Be a person." She let out a choked laugh. "The hardest thing you've ever asked of me. Number just the truest." When Daniel left, Isabella stood in the doorway, shaking, but stronger. "If I fall again?" she called after him. Daniel turned, his gaze steady, deep. "Then I'll sit right beside you until you're ready to try again." In her gray eyes, for the first time, a spark lit up, not of power, not of contempt, but of hope. That morning, the penthouse training room was filled with sunlight, but the atmosphere was different. Isabella Grant was already seated on the mat, hair tied back, white t-shirt damp with sweat. No assistant, no wheelchair beside her. Daniel stepped in, momentarily stunned. "When did you start?" "Around 5 a.m., Isabella replied, her voice hoarse but her eyes blazing. "I couldn't sleep. I wanted to try earlier." That day's training was fiercer than ever. They repeated the towel pulls, then moved to leg lifts with resistance bands. Isabella trembled, face contorted with pain, but her feet moved further than before. Then Daniel said quietly, "Now, try standing." Isabella swallowed hard. Her whole body tightened, hands pressed against the mat, shoulders straining. Slowly, painfully, she straightened her back. Her legs shook as if they might snap, sweat soaking her shirt. But she stood. 1 second. 2, 3. Tears streamed down her face, unstoppable. The once impenetrable woman sobbed openly. I really stood." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady, grounding. "Not stood. You made yourself stand." In that moment, she was no longer a CEO in a chair, no longer the fallen Queen of Wall Street. She was simply a woman, reclaiming herself. 3 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with thousands of crystal chandeliers. It was the annual fundraising gala for the Spinal Injury Research Foundation, founded by Isabella herself. Famous doctors, Wall Street billionaires, reporters, influencers crowded the hall. Isabella arrived, radiant in a navy blue gown. Her assistant pushed her wheelchair under a storm of flashing cameras. Just like the past 5 years, she entered like a queen, unmoving but powerful. At the back of the room, Daniel Hayes stood in a borrowed suit, slightly ill-fitting but neat. Emily, in a pale blue dress, clutched his hand, eyes wide with wonder. "She looks like a queen," Emily whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand, smiling softly. Because she is. Midway through the night, the MC called Isabella to speak. The ballroom fell silent, expecting the same polished, icy speech as every year. Her assistant stepped forward, ready to take the microphone, but Isabella raised a hand. Her voice rang clear. "No, I'll do it myself." The room froze. She placed both hands on her wheelchair's armrests. Muscles tightened, sweat beaded at her temple. Hundreds of eyes locked on her. A wall of cameras flashed. And then she stood. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Murmurs erupted. Some reporters forgot to take pictures, their jaws dropping. Isabella took a step, then another. Her heels struck the marble floor, each click echoing like a war drum. By the time she placed her hand on the podium, the entire ballroom had forgotten how to breathe. Her voice rang out, slow but sharp as a blade. "For a long time, I believed that standing still was power. But the truth, standing still was only fear, dressed in elegance." She looked straight at the front rows, where the tycoons and the doctors who had once dismissed her sat frozen. "I spent 5 years in a wheelchair, not because I couldn't walk, but because I was terrified of the cost of trying again." A gasp burst from the back rows. The room seemed suspended in air. "I built walls higher than recovery. I turned pain into elegance. I turned silence into dignity. And it nearly killed me." Her voice caught, but her eyes shone with fire. "Tonight, I don't stand before you as a CEO, a benefactor, or a symbol. I stand before you as a woman who just remembered her own name." At the back, Daniel stood motionless, his vision blurred. Emily jumped up, whisper yelling, "She did it!" Isabella drew a deep breath. "If there is one thing I leave you with tonight, it is this. Healing doesn't need anyone's permission. It only takes one reckless, courageous moment when you decide to try." 2 endless seconds of silence. Then the room exploded. Thunderous applause, shouts, tears. People rose to their feet, cheering. Some reporters dropped their cameras, fumbling to shoot while wiping their eyes. But Isabella heard none of it. Her gaze fixed only on the corner of the room, where Daniel watched her, and Emily raised both little hands in pure, unfiltered joy. Isabella nodded faintly. It was no longer, "I did it." It was, "We did it." That night, on the balcony of the plaza overlooking the glittering lights of Central Park, Isabella slipped off her heels and perched on the stone ledge. Daniel joined her, placing a steaming cup of tea in her hand. "You made the whole city stop tonight," he said softly. Isabella smirked faintly. "And you made me fall, then forced me to rise." Daniel shook his head. "Number, you rose on your own." She turned, her eyes softer than ever. "You know, when I stood tonight, I didn't feel pride. I felt free." Daniel smiled gently. "Freedom doesn't come from walking. It comes from the moment you decide not to stay still." A light breeze swept past. Isabella leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, she allowed herself to be fragile, and to let someone else carry a piece of the weight. 3 days after the plaza event, the video of Isabella Grant standing had swept across social media. Not only financial newspapers, but even the tabloids that once mocked her now replayed that moment. From wheelchair to podium, Isabella Grant redefines healing. CEO or warrior? The woman who defied silence. But amid the noise, Isabella sat quietly in her penthouse living room, dressed in a gray sweater, holding the chipped old mug she had abandoned back in her college days. For the first time in years, she drank coffee not from crystal. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Press, donors, old acquaintances. She ignored them all. Her eyes lingered on a single message from her mother in Vermont. "You're standing stronger than ever. I thought I lost you." Now I see you've returned." For once, Isabella's cold gray eyes welled with tears. She closed the phone and drew a deep breath. That afternoon, Isabella visited the Hope Center, the project Daniel Hayes had once dreamed of but never had the chance to build. For now, it borrowed the basement of an old Brooklyn church. Peeling paint on the walls, chipped chairs, water-stained ceilings. Yet inside, warmth filled the air. Patients doing physical therapy, a little girl in a neck brace laughing as she finished a puzzle, a veteran carefully rising with the help of a frame. Daniel led Isabella down the narrow hallway. "We don't have much, but here, they're not just names in a medical file." Isabella paused, taking it in. Then she turned to him. "If we were to make this a permanent center, how much would it take?" Daniel hesitated. "More than one viral video." Isabella smirked. "Good thing I don't live off fleeting moments anymore." A month later, the grand opening of the Hope Center for Healing took place in a newly leased former hospital. The front courtyard overflowed with people: patients, families, doctors, volunteers, reporters. Isabella arrived without a wheelchair, without a cane. Just a simple white blouse, trousers, her hair loose. Daniel stood beside her, scissors in hand for the ribbon cutting, while Emily clung to his hand, proudly sticking a glittery hope sticker on her chest. Before the ribbon was cut, Isabella asked for the microphone. The crowd hushed. "This center does not exist because of donations or a headline," she said, her voice steady and warm. "It exists because one man saw me when I couldn't even look at myself. A man with hands calloused from holding a mop, a heart cracked by loss, and eyes that carried more truth than any expert I ever hired." She turned to Daniel. "He called it hope, and today I call it love." The crowd erupted. Daniel stood still, tears glistening. Emily leapt up, shouting, "Daddy, they're cheering for you." Daniel shook his head with a smile, but his eyes had never shone brighter. Together, they cut the red ribbon. The doors swung open. Children ran in first, laughter echoing through the halls. Someone began to play the old piano in the lobby, a hopeful melody filling the air. That evening, after the ceremony ended, the building's balcony still held the last light of sunset. Isabella stood there, the wind tugging at her hair. Daniel stepped out with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Day 1, and already this place has a heartbeat," he said. Isabella took the cup, smiling softly. "Yes, but that heartbeat started with you." He opened his mouth to protest, but she placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes steady yet tender. "Daniel, I've fought all my life to be seen as a CEO, as a winner. But only you saw me as a woman still capable of living, and that saved me." Silence lingered. Then Isabella whispered, "I don't want to walk forward alone anymore. Not anymore." Daniel inhaled, his gaze meeting hers. He didn't answer with words, only tightened his hand around hers. A few weeks later, at a Brooklyn elementary school's community day, Emily ran up, waving a hand-drawn card, a picture of a woman rising from a wheelchair, with a little girl cheering beside her. Scrawled at the top, "Heroes don't need capes, only courage." Isabella looked at the drawing, pulling Emily into a fierce hug. Tears spilled, but these were tears of release, of peace. That night, in Daniel's small Brooklyn apartment, it was no longer just father and daughter. Isabella sat by the bed, reading Emily a bedtime story. The room glowed with soft, golden light. On the nightstand, the battered doll Lucy sat quietly, a silent witness. When Emily drifted to sleep, Daniel moved to the window, gazing out at the night sky. Isabella joined him, leaning her shoulder against his. "Do you think Emily will be okay?" she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his voice firm. She already is. And so are we. They stood there in the small room, with hearts larger than ever before. Another month later, the front page of the New York Times, From Ashes, CEO Isabella Grant, and the Hope Center redefine healing. But for Isabella, the headlines, the millions of views, the accolades, none of it mattered. What mattered was this morning. When she opened her eyes, Emily ran into bed, threw her arms around her and called out, "Miss Isabella!" in her pure, ringing voice. And Daniel walked out of the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, smiling. The family is ready for a new day. Isabella closed her eyes, her heart overflowing with peace. No longer the woman imprisoned in a chair, no longer the untouchable CEO, but a person, a woman, a mother, a lover, and most of all, a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, take a moment and breathe deeply. Because sometimes, just one small action, one unexpected encounter, is enough to change an entire life. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We'd love to see how the Behind the Tale community stretches across the globe. And remember, every story carries a message. For you, what lingers after watching? Is it Daniel's patience, Isabella's courage, or Emily's innocent smile? Share your thoughts. Your words might be the very inspiration someone else needs. If you enjoy healing, inspiring stories like this one, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. Thank you for spending your time with True Tale Time. Until the next story, keep kindness in your heart, keep hope alive, and never forget, love can rewrite any ending.